In this video, we are going to discuss about the dietary management of type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is basically mostly diagnosed in children, and that is what I'll be focusing on more. So we'll start by defining what is diabetes. Diabetes mellitus is a group of metabolic disorder characterized by hyperglycemia resulting from a defect in insulin secretion, insulin action, or both the secretion and action. It can also be defined as a chronic condition that affects how the body uses glucose, a type of sugar that produces energy in the body. So when you're looking at diabetes, we have two types of diabetes. We have diabetes type 1, which is also known as the juvenile diabetes or insulin dependent diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, the reason we are calling it juvenile is basically because it's a chronic condition where the pancreas makes little or no insulin at all. In type 2, it occurs when the body becomes resistant to the effect of insulin or does not produce enough insulin. So in type 2, the body produces insulin, but there is an issue in the way the body uses that insulin. Probably the body has become resistant or the insulin produced is not enough. Type 2 diabetes is mostly diagnosed in adults and can also be attributed to lifestyle issues such as being overweight or obese and other issues. But in this video, I would like us to focus on the type 1 diabetes. So what's the dietary approach to management of type 1 diabetes? For a parent, if you're told that your baby has been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, it can be a very traumatizing and stressful moment because one, you would be asking, what is it that my child will be eating? There's a lot of confusion, a lot of myths in terms of what to offer to children and what not to offer. Sometimes you find that some people get too many exclusions, such that now you start wondering, okay, I'm told my baby not to eat this, not to eat that, not to eat the other, then what do I offer? It becomes very confusing for a parent. But remember, as much as this child has been diagnosed with diabetes, this is a child who is growing. And so we have to be considerate of the growth needs, not just about managing the diabetes. It is managing the diabetes alongside what is required for this child to achieve growth, because that's also a major factor. So number one, you need to consider all food groups. By all food groups, what do I mean? When you're looking at the foods that we have at least 5 major food groups. We have our starch, which is also referred commonly as the carbohydrate. We have our proteins. We have the animal protein and the plant protein. We have our fruits. We have our vegetables, and we have our fats and oils. Now, our number one question would be, in this food group, are there things that this child should not eat? And my answer would be no. This child requires to eat everything in this food group. And reason being, this is a growing child. All the nutrition benefits that are coming from these groups are required by that child. Okay? So we will need to give all the food groups. This child will need to consume starch, will need to consume fruits, will need to consume vegetables, will need to consume our protein and fats. So when you're looking at the major food groups, then we may not really have exclusions per se when it comes to these major food groups. However, there would be some exclusions. And the exclusions that we would have are things that we would call the added sugar. Like, for example, if you're adding sugar to tea, we are looking at things like sodas, we are looking at things like commercial juices, we are looking at all those things. Yes, those could be exclusions because they would have a major effect on how the blood sugar behaves. So yes, the child is supposed to eat all the food groups. That should not be forgotten. Then now we come to the next thing, what we would call the portion control. So one, we have agreed that the child should be having everything from the food groups. Then now comes in the aspect of portion control, which basically means how much of these foods should this child be eating? Because that is now the next step. Yes, the child has been diagnosed with diabetes. So when we have come to the food groups, yes, we have agreed that the child should be eating from all the food groups. And then next should be the portion control. So as much as we are having everything in all these food groups, then we should be able to tell that at this particular time, on what portion, how much. If, for example, if this child is having, let's say, a meal of maybe rice with some beef stew and some vegetables, then how much rice, how much of the beef stew, how much of the vegetables, so that then we are able to have a good control in terms of the blood sugar. So portion control is also something that is important. But I would also want to emphasize, when you're doing the portion control, it does not mean that you're only focusing on the portion. This portion has to achieve two things. One, we have to be working towards achieving a good blood sugar. And then number two, we should be ensuring that, yes, this is the portion we are having, which also meets the requirements of this child in terms of nutritional requirements as per the age, as per the weight of this particular child. Then number three, we are looking at our food choices. Yes, we have agreed we are feeding from all the food groups, but now how do we make our food choices? Why would we pick a certain type of starch over a different kind of starch? But not to mean that with their starches that we would say these ones would be more recommended than the other. Of course, you have what you're calling glycemic index, which we might discuss later on in another different video, which basically means how is the release of the sugar in different kinds of food. Yeah, so for some maybe a little bit faster, others may be a little bit slow. So then that will also determine on our food, will help us determine in terms of the food choices that we are going to be looking at. The number four, we should be then looking at our food or our meal combination. By this I mean, if I am having a meal, let's say it's lunch I am preparing for my child, then what and what would I pick? And if I'm picking a certain thing, how will the combination affect each other? Okay. Like, for example, if I am looking at a meal of having, let's say I'm looking at having some rice with some beef stew and some vegetables. And then in another different setup, I'm looking at having some rice, maybe with a plant based protein, maybe beans, maybe dengu, or maybe some lentils, and then my vegetables. Is there a combination that may determine that if I'm having rice with beans, then a certain portion may be higher than the other, or if I am having rice with beef, then the meal combination also plays a big part of it. Why does the meal combination play a role in terms of the diabetes sugar management? This is because when you're looking at the food groups that you have discussed, there are certain foods that will contain carbs that will basically be, at the end of the digestion process, be converted to sugar. For example, if you're looking at the plant-based protein, like something like beans, yes, beans is not a starch. It is a protein. However, it has a component of carbs, okay, which at the end of the digestion process will give us the glucose that we are talking about. When you're looking at something, let's say like the meat, like beef, for example, it will have no carbs. Okay. So then if you're having a combination of maybe a starch with a plant protein and your vegetables, then the amount of starch you're taking may need to reduce a bit, because at that particular point, you're having two sources of carbs. You're getting your carbs bar from maybe the starch and also from the protein. So you may notice the combinations may vary in terms of portion. When you're looking at an example, if you're having, let's say, some rice and maybe some beef, then you notice your source of carb at that particular point may just basically be one, which is now the rice being a starch. The meat is not giving you any carbs. So then you need to balance in terms of the rice maybe a little bit more than it was when you're having the meal with a plant-based protein. So the meal combination is also an important factor in terms of how you combine your meals in terms of diabetes management. Okay. So in our conclusion, so what are we saying when it comes to diabetes management in children? One, we are saying that we are supposed to consume meals from all the food groups. Then number two, we are looking at it from the aspect of not just basically controlling the sugar, we are also looking at the requirements of the child. How much is enough for this child to achieve the nutritional requirements for his age as per his weight? Then number 3, we have looked at something we call portion control, which is also important. How we portion the meals so that we are able to work. Because you find most of the times children who are on type 1 then are also on insulin. So you need to match the amount of carbohydrate this child is eating to match it with the insulin that this child is using to be able to have a good control in terms of sugar. We are looking also at the food choices. What is it that we are looking at? Why would we prefer this over that? Why would we combine this with that and not this with the other? And then also we have the meal combination. So it's generally looking at the entire meal. So when you're looking at dietary management, it's not a special diabetic meal that we would say. It is generally what the rest of the family is eating, but now we are factoring certain things like combination and portion, so that we don't want, because in children we also don't want to create a feeling of a child feeling like I am being treated in quote unquote in a special way in this family. Everybody else is eating different from what I am eating. So we don't want to put like this child having diabetes is kind of stigma. Okay, so we'd like to just have to incorporate this child in just the general meals that every other person is taking in the house. So in the next video, we'd look at something called the carb counting. Carb counting basically means matching our insulin with the amount of carbs that we are consuming. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let me see each other in the next video.